feature presentation.
Zia, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. Something that I wanted to ask you about, you tweeted something a little while ago during the making of my first film, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on the differences between the narrative adaptation of the movie compared to the multimedia performance. And what you said was, and I'm going to read this,
Okay.
being personal in your art is the best thing to be unless you are too personal and make people uncomfortable. And if you do that, you should try to be more universal and just tell someone else's story. Basically, here is the cheat I figured out. Art, do whatever you want. Critical acclaim, personal enough to make people uncomfortable. Commodity, universal story. And do you think the film and the performance can be categorized differently based on this code, or do they even fit
Mm,
into this code?
totally. Oh my God. What year did I tweet that?
You tweeted that back in 2021, and then the day
Okay.
before, or no, the same day, you also posted, and this is another question I have, but I'll get to it later. You put my first film part two, and then one of the questions I also had in relation to that was, do you consider the film to be a sequel or a remake?
Oh my God. Okay, cool. Amazing. I think I probably still believe in that. you know, I was never like I never have never had a lot of followers, and I've never had there's nothing prolific about what I'm saying, but I definitely am like a shit poster. I've learned I've learned not to be one. I'm like but yeah, I mean I think that right, that's like what the day and age that we're living in, that kind of this indie cinema in the 2010s and the mumblecore, and the kind of personal filmmaking or stories about people that normally don't have their stories tell has led us to, which is like everyone's trying to figure out how to tell a story, but also you want or filmmaking is like so capitalist, like you need so much money to do it that even if it's like the smallest micro budget thing, you still need more money than like you, than like pencils, right? Like it's not like you're a drawer that draws after so I think that I still really believe in that, and I think that the performance uh was really cool because it felt like it really resonated with a lot of people, and there was kind of like critical acclaim around it, but it was still so niche that it just felt like so special in this way that um I could have never imagined, and I could have never imagined connecting with people in such a personal way. With the film, I think I honestly don't know, because I haven't like we haven't shown it that much yet, and so kind of like the reactions to, and also I'm really staying away from reactions. I'm staying away from like anything written about it. I'm really trying to not name search myself because it doesn't do anything, right? Whereas the performance was this fluid thing that I could like continue to do and change and interact with the audience. Like the film is done. I can't go back in and edit it. And I think I've said all I want to say. Like I don't want to like argue with somebody or about anything. Like probably if someone thinks I should have done something differently, like I might agree with them, but I can't change it. So I don't know. I don't want to get too in my head. I hope that it finds an audience that is vast and wide, who resonate, who it resonates with, because I think that we all have these kinds of stories in our life, and I I just wanted to practice what it was like to make something that felt really really big, and felt but also felt like incredibly personal, right? Like um so yes, I don't know exactly where they fall in any of these things, but right now they both feel very niche.
Yeah,
um
well, that's something you even bring up in the film about like the conversation, about esoteric and the nature
right,
of like what that even means in
right.
terms of, coming from such a very personal place.
Yeah.
you know, like there are some filmmakers that do go back and re-edit their works and look at them differently. I mean, obviously, notoriously George Lucas to
Yeah.
Francis Ford Coppola. So there are filmmakers that still experiment with the past in a way that I find even with this film, like I was reminded a little bit of like something like Stories We Tell or The Arborer
Hmm.
in terms of how
Hmm.
they're pushing the boundaries of how we look at films and something personal. I wanted to also ask you, did you ever feel any hesitation or doubts working on this project or this adaptation of, a story that is so personal? Because you've talked in past interviews about having doubts about directing music videos, and I've never heard that from directors before, because
Yeah.
usually it's always about like, oh yes, absolutely, I'll take that role on, or, the ability to
Yeah.
have this opportunity.
Yeah. I knew when I kind of decided to make this movie that that I was going to feel really conflicted about sharing my own personal story and, you know, the wide reach that could, like most people are not out there saying like, this is what happened to me. Um, and I also knew that like I was kind of sick of seeing movies that were like personal, but not really about the filmmaker, or, um, you know, personal, but like didn't necessarily like, but very traditional, right? Like there was still like some sort of tradition to them. So I kind of thought like, well, I might regret this. I might be, in 10 years I might not like this, but right now what I really want to do is like love this project and love the opportunity of getting to make this project with like so many amazing collaborators, and so I just really was totally aware that might not it might totally bomb. It might bomb while I'm making it. It might bomb when I'm editing it. It might bomb in 10 years. It might bomb in 50 years. Like I have no idea, but also like being concerned about what it might do versus being obsessed with like what was directly in front of me and just making something like that the latter was much more important than being worried about, you know, the future of it.
Well, I think that's something that a lot of filmmakers, think about, or people in terms of what they're putting out there, because once you make something and you have to eventually let it go, people interpret it their own way and come to it in that kind of way. And so I was also interested in asking you about, were there specific cliches and tropes that you consciously wanted to avoid when breaking the fourth wall? Because there's a mention early on that this probably shouldn't be a film, and I
Yeah,
think in a filmmaker, maybe in lesser hands, this would have been something that comes off as obnoxious, but it feels very personal and a stream of consciousness in terms of how the story is told.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I I oh my god, I'm like that. I'm like, this is like a 5-hour question. This is it's really good. I'm like, I have no idea even where to begin. I think that like one thing I was really sure of was my collaborators' abilities. And so maybe I shouldn't be a filmmaker and maybe this story shouldn't be a film, right? But you know what? The people that are around me are fucking great filmmakers. I mean, Ashley Connor, who's the cinematographer, Billy Feldman, the co-writer, Joe Beanie, the editor, Matt Hannum, the editor. Like, there's so many more people that like, all of the department heads, all of the camera assistants, all of the like the people, like the PAs and stuff like that. Like they're all really great at what they do. And so I think that I was really just trusting of that. And I think, it was a huge lesson, because that first time I made a film, I was like totally untrusting. And this time in making it, I just like gave myself into the process. I gave into the collaborators, and tried to just give them as much information as possible to tell this story as good as possible. Or in the most cohesive and exciting and dynamic way as possible. The actors, right? Like I just gave them as much information as possible, and then I really trusted them to do their thing. And so I would you squarely put, right, like any of its success on them and the way that they did things, because I think that, right, like this film really rides the line of like, even, I mean, it's just, it's really fucking out there. It does it does, and in that way, you know, staying away, I think the first part of the question was about cliches and stuff like that. In that way, I was like, I didn't really want to stay away from anything as much as I just wanted the film to move towards some version of filmmaking that felt the most like my experience and my experience working with these people around me. And so, in fact, it kind of starts, I mean, the very first thing you see is not cliche, but the first like 20 minutes of the movie is like straight up like crazy like group scenes and voiceover, right? And I
Yeah.
kept being, this is so cliche. I thought it was actually really cliche, but it also is what was needed to tell the story. And so every scene you kind of are like taking a new piece of like cinematic language, not just for the sake of doing that, but to tell the story better, right? To and that's, I think, how we ended up how we did. And I think, you know, I'm really, really proud of it, and mostly really proud of the work that everybody did, because it's so fun.
You should be.
And
It's a wonderful movie. And I just
oh,
wanted to ask you specifically about the structure of it, because you always hear the old adage of, it's really hard to find an ending. Was that true in this production, and working with Billy Feldman in terms of,
yeah,
bringing something so personal together? But even the beginning, it feels like you could drop in at any point in Vita's life.
right. Well, I mean, the beginning. I think that like maybe the problem that we had was that like we had too many endings, right? Which was the problem I had the first time. It just like keeps going and going and going. And so at a certain point, we like really late in the editing process, we acknowledged that, right? There's a piece of voiceover which like is about the first film, and it's like, and the film had many endings, right? Which this film does too, but we just had so many endings. And I think, you know, the hardest part of the process was actually getting from the beginning to the ending, right? Like it was not necessarily the beginning or the ending. I mean, although one of the last things we added was some of that stuff that was written at the beginning.
Yeah.
But and then also that voiceover at the ending where I'm like, I'm speaking and we're walking through the audience, or not the audience, sorry,
The set?
the set. That's a weird slip. We're walking through we're walking through the crew. Those were two of the last things that we added, because although it felt like we really made it from the beginning to ending, and we really kind of like entered one door of like a house that we thought was like one color, and then exited through a house that was like an entirely different shape and color and size. Although it felt like that, we really needed to like we really needed to have finesse. There needed to be this like really, really great finesse, which again I owe like completely to the editors. Like me and Billy worked a lot together and just getting the raw shit down on the page. But like at the end of the day, it's like the editors that are writing, you know, that you're writing the movie with, or the finished movie with.
Oh, absolutely. And the editors, I mean, having worked from, everybody from Werner Herzog to Andrea Arnold, like it feels like, there's this amazing collaborative process going on, and we're seeing something really exciting and new take place. In terms of casting Odessa Young, what made her the perfect muse for this film? And also, was there ever a point where you saw her taking over as Vita and even saw yourself in her?
Oh yeah, I mean, she's so good. Like I just knew that she was kind of like, I had watched all these movies she was in, and I love I love her in Josephine Decker's Shirley. And
Shirley. Ah, yes.
yeah, and I thought that she was like, she's just so good because she's really like really beautiful and wonderful and likable, and also just has the ability to like shed everything and get totally ugly and get totally disgusting. And I knew that I wanted this character to have a lot of unlikable qualities. And maybe that's just because like I, you know, didn't like myself back then or whatever, or, you know, didn't from this point of view don't like myself, but I knew that that was like a really big part of it. And I just thought that she kind of stood out among this whole world of young actors who are all really talented, but she just is so, she just drops all sense of self. And so we did a lot to prepare. You know, I gave her all the information I could about myself back then. And then she was like, I'm gonna do like your central New York accent. And I was like, no, please don't. Because sometimes accents ruin things, right? And she's like,
Yeah.
just like let me try. And the first day she like shows up on set and she's doing it, and it was so uncanny. It's like I like people, and we're also like both wearing these baseball hats, and we're like, I'd hear this person behind me that was me, and I would like turn around like, oh my God, who was that? And it was her. And then I would watch the monitor, and I would, you know, there's all these photos of like me watching the monitor. I'm kind of just like in disbelief. And everybody who's on the set just had the same kind of like jaw drop, which I think actually was like really great. And you know, like all the love that I didn't have for that character, she brought to it, right? Like you know, you never want to hear yourself talk, right? I'm sure, yeah, you're like doing, you have to hear yourself talk all the time, and I'm
Oh,
sure it's
it's
like,
awful.
oh my God, I'm talking, and it was so amazing to for her to witness her doing that, because I got to see someone like love, you know, I it's really smart for an actor to love the character they're playing, even if it's like a despicable character. And not to say that Vita is like wholly despicable, but it was really great to watch her like love this character so much, because it just gave me an entirely different perspective on myself, and like who I was and what I did, and also where I am now. And you know, I also like, you know, really, I really wanted her to have a really fucking fun and intense role to dive into. I also think that just in general, like, you know, young women are not given these big roles that like, you know, men are often given. And so that was, you know, I just kind of kept trying to give her stuff that then she could process in whatever way. But yeah, I mean, she's like one of a kind. She's the best.